my lecture recital during this pandemic. I would like to let you know that this lecture recital will be no intermission. I'm going to present and analyze the piece, and then I'm going to perform and analyze the second piece and perform. So that means no break. I'd like to start the lecture with playing some music of the composer. While I play the piece with my amazing violist Heejin, can you guess who might be the composer? So Heejin, could you? Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Heejin. Can you guess which era the composer lived? This is a real question. Surprisingly, the piece is by George Rochberg, who died only 2 decades ago. So as you listen to this piece, you could have easily believed that this work was written in the 19th century. However, did you know that Rochberg was famous for his serial music? Here is another short passage from Rochberg Viola Sonata. Yes, so how could one composer write such different music? This is something I would like to talk about tonight. I divide Rochberg's musical career into 3 periods, early, middle, and late. And I'm going to introduce 3 piano solo works that best represent each period. So let me briefly introduce his life. George Rochberg was born on July 5th, 1918 in New Jersey. He was first exposed to music through his brother's violin lesson. And Rochberg was a teenager when he first developed an interest in jazz. In 1935, Rochberg entered a Montclair State Teachers College where he sang high baritone. After graduating from Montclair State Teachers College, Rochberg entered at the Venice College of Music. And there, he met his wife, Jean Rosenfield. But the year after they got married, the United States entered the World War II. And then Rochberg was drafted into the army. Because of some injuries, Rochberg returned to the United States. And then he resumed his musical studies at Curtis. Then he went on to complete a master's degree at the University of Pennsylvania. In 1950, Rochberg had a chance to stay in Rome for a year. There he met Luigi Dalla Piccola, who was an Italian serialist composer, and he ended up very influential figure on Rochberg, especially for lyrical serialism. After this, Rochberg became a serial composer for a decade. When he came back from Rome, he ended up working as an editor at Theodore Presser Company. After resigning from his post at the Theodore Presser Company in 1960, Rochberg became the acting chair of the University of Pennsylvania. And this appointment boosted his international reputation as he became colleagues alongside fellow composers including George Crumb and Leonard Meyer. In 1961, Rochberg's 17 years old son, Paul, died because of the brain tumor. Because of this tragic event, Rochberg concluded that serial music did not have the emotional capability to express his sorrow. In an interview with Robert Riley, he recalled, "Actually, by 1961, I was already experiencing very serious doubts about this thing called 12 tone, and I am beginning to think that there is something wrong here." The trauma in Rochberg's personal life gave him an occasion to reflect on music's expressive potential. And Rochberg began to search for a musical language better suited to his creative and expressive needs. Rochberg found what he was looking for in music of the past. He used the technique of musical quotation or the recycling of pre-existing music as a raw material for his original creation. In 1971, Rochberg confirmed his move away from serialism. Rochberg's new music provoked a harsh criticism from his former colleagues. However, Rochberg's music from 1970 and 80s enjoyed widespread popularity among the performers and audiences. For example, his violin concerto was performed 47 times between 1975 and 1977 after his initial performance by Isaac Stern. Rochberg also exercised and influenced music theory through his books and publication in numerous music journals. His best-known books include 5 Lines and 4 Spaces and The Aesthetic of Survival. Rochberg's stylistic evolution can be summarized as follows. An early style, which naturally includes his formal education, and features creative works that explore neoclassicism and atonality. A middle style, which was deeply serialist and continued until 1963. And a late style, which can be largely characterized as neo-romanticism. Today, I'm going to talk about 3 solo piano works in particular. I chose one from each of 3 periods. 2 Prelude and Fugue in D minor, Sonata-Fantasia for middle period, and Carnival music for late period. First, in George Rochberg's early period, he was exposed to a variety of musical genres at an early age. He performed as a jazz pianist while Rochberg was in New York. Performing jazz in a club was also a way for him to earn a living and pay for his tuition. As I mentioned earlier, he was drafted into the army, and Rochberg's wartime experience, especially the participation of Normandy landings, profoundly affected his art and his worldview. The composer recalled, "The war years were much more than an interruption in my musical studies. They taught me what art really meant because I learned what life really meant. The war shaped my psyche and internal development." In fact, before World War II, Rochberg's work were mostly tonal. However, the war altered his philosophy and sense of morality. It drew him toward the atonal music. He stated, "After the war, after I began to feel I had my feet on the ground musically, and in other ways too, the drama, the darkness of what whole experience. And that's what started to push me into a kind of atonal world. 1955 is considered the end of the Rochberg's early period. Solo piano works from this period include a ballad, book of contrapuntal pieces, variations on original theme, 2 preludes and fuguetta, which I'm going to represent, Sonata number 1, Sonata Seria, and Sonata number 2. Prelude and fuguetta in D minor shows his early period characteristic very well. Rochberg composed this work in 1946 while he was studying at Mainz. As the title suggests, Rochberg had been studying J.S. Bach Waltenperklavier. In the prelude, it shows all the features of Baroque music. Some of these include imitation, repetition of motif, and pedal point. However, it was not enough for Rochberg to just simply imitate and study Baroque compositional technique. He went beyond the boundaries of the Baroque era. So in terms of indication and time signature, it passed in 5/4 time and marked not just low, but very expressive. By using English, not the traditional Italian, this is a classical example of 20th century music vocabulary. So here's the opening of the prelude. In the opening there is 3 phrases of the prelude, and each phrase introduces 9 different pitches. So if I play the very beginning of the prelude, to the first phrase, it has A, B flat, F sharp, G, D, C sharp, F, E, E flat. Already, it introduced 9 different pitches. Also in the second phrase, which consists of C, G, C, F, E flat, D, B, F sharp, B flat, F, C sharp. Yes, it repeats the G and F, but however, all 12 notes are introduced by the end of the second measure, except G sharp. I don't know if you can see the green circle on G sharp. G sharp arrives at a very important moment with the entrance of the answer in measure 4. So in this respect, even though it is an early period work, there is a clear tendency toward a use of chromaticism. And this can be foreshadowing of Rochberg's later engagement of 12-tone technique. When it comes to fuguetta, Rochberg follows a standard procedure of fugue writing. He used both tonal and real answers and augmented subject. And interestingly, he inserts the opening motif of the fugue from J.S. Bach, Waltenperklavier in C minor. And I think you might recognize this piece. Not only this quote appears in this original key, but it stands alone. So if I play this fuguetta, this part, so I believe that this is very important demonstration of his early experiment with quoting musical materials from others composer. Another interesting feature is Rochberg's way of coloring the harmony with the Neapolitan sixth chord before the cadence. So I'll play the very end of the Fuguetto. Using the altered chord is highly unusual in fugal writing. So not only does it stretch beyond the tradition of Baroque, but it even crosses into the 19th century harmonic language. So in this respect, this shows technique of tradition, counterpoint, through its use of tonal and real answers, pedal point, and piccoli third. However, not by repeating the first 9 notes in the prelude, Rochberg shows his eventual path to serialism. Furthermore, by quoting J.S. Bach Fugue, he foreshadows the quotation technique that is highlighted in his later works. Even though the Prelude and Fuguetta in D minor is an early period work, it already shows so many different characteristics that will eventually become recognized in later works. So, here's the Fuguetta in D minor. It will take 5 minutes. the middle period, Rochberg first encountered the Schoenberg's 12-tone system through his teacher Adolf Weiss, and Weiss was a pupil of Schoenberg. I think it might be interesting to mention this, that Rochberg was not the only important American composer who has been studying with Adolf Weiss. Surprisingly enough, so was John Cage, who's very different from Rochberg. So anyway, Rochberg recalled his studies as follows. I had begun to study Schoenberg with considerable intensity around 1947, and it was from the very beginning a love-hate relationship. It did not matter to me whether I liked it or not. I had to find out what was there, why it was there, and how it was made. In 1950, Rochberg was a recipient of American Academy Prize, who allowed him to live in Rome for a year. So there he met Luigi Dalla Piccola, whose serial music deeply influenced Rochberg's style. So let us hear a short excerpt of Dalla Piccola's variation for orchestra. Yes, so as you can listen to this piece, even though it is serial, it is still singable. This lyrical serialism highly influenced Rochberg. In 1952, he began a decade of composing using serial technique. This serial period saw the creation of 4 piano solo works, 12 Bagatelle for piano, which is Rochberg's first entirely 12-tone piece, Arioso, Sonata-Fantasia, and Barcatonia. Above all, Rochberg articulated the importance of lyricism. In an interview with Robert Riley, he said, I am a natural singer. My 12-tone music also sings in a way that no American 12-tone music sings. So Rochberg's commitment to songful writing unites the music from all 3 periods. His lifelong lyricism is central to understanding him as a man and as a composer. So I would like to repeat that again. His lifelong lyricism is central to understand him as a man and as a composer. So let us examine the Sonata-Fantasia, which representative piano work from his middle period. Written in 1955, it was premiered by Howard Lubbock at the Juilliard School. Rochberg considered this composition one of only 3 works dedicated to his wife to be among his best. Rochberg himself admitted that the influence of Charles Ives Concord Sonata and Stefan Wolf Passacaglia. Above all, these reflect a clear demonstration of Schoenberg's serial technique. He quotes a passage from Schoenberg's 5 Klavierstück Opus 23, number 1. The Sonata-Fantasia is a serial work that consists of 3 large movements that are connected by prologue and 2 interludes and epilogue. Interestingly, the 3 large movements do not share any melodic or rhythmic motifs. However, the prologue, interludes, 2 interludes, and epilogue do share a common musical ideas. As the title suggests, these 8-tone pieces engage 2 distinctive genres, the sonata and the fantasy, both of which emerged and developed from the traditional tonal music. And I will focus on the prelude, prologue, and the first movement in this lecture. Since it's 12-tone music, the basic role of this piece can be divided into 4 subsets, and each consisting 3 consecutive notes. The first subset is and the second subset, third one. These chromatic subsets present very dissonant sonorities. So this is how Rochberg used the row in the beginning of the Sonata-Fantasia. And meanwhile, the notes that are not highlighted also makes a use of serial units, only transposed. The first movement is through compose and feature improvisatory passage. Here's the important feature. Schoenberg's 5 Klavierstück, Opus 23, number 1, is quoted directly. Transposed onto 3 staves. Borrowing a musical material from other composers is the characteristic of a late period compositions. Just as we saw in the Fugetta, he quotes Woltenberg Clavier Fugue. It already shows his borrowing technique in his earlier period too. Not only did Rochberg quote the material from Schoenberg, but he also used the rhetorical lament gesture he frequently employed in this Baroque era. So this is specifically illustrated by the chromatic descending line. So in Baroque era, this descending second is considered as a lament gesture. Sounds like and Rochberg illustrated like this. Interestingly, the same year he wrote a Sonata-Fantasia, he published his theory book called The Hexachord and its relation to the 12-tone row. Ironically, the use of tone row in the Sonata-Fantasia proves much freer in comparison to his earlier works. In fact, he recalled, there is no row. It is clear that Rochberg developed his own way of composing 12-tone works. So in this respect, Rochberg's early 12-tone music was very strict, whereas the later works shows flexibility. He sought to create original music, original serial music, with emphasis on expression and emotion. Furthermore, Rochberg did not abandon the traditional elements. In the case of Sonata-Fantasia, he employs the traditional 3-movement form, cyclical form, and uses 2 genres, sonatas and fantasy. I'm going to present first 2 sections of Sonata-Fantasia, and it will take 10 minutes or so. Rochberg became very famous for his serial music, he felt compelled to search for a new method of writing music. He said, "I couldn't breathe anymore. I needed air. I was tired of the same round of manipulating the pitches vertically and horizontally. It wasn't so much that the scale were out of running. Arpeggios were out of running. Octave passages were out of running. There is everything artificial about it." So there is a transitional period before Rochberg moved completely towards the tonality. There are three aspects that highly influence Rochberg's late musical style. First, the influence of Charles Ives. Second, the visual arts. And third, of course, the death of his son. While looking for an answer for a departure from serialism, Rochberg found inspiration in the music of Charles Ives. Ives' musical style is quoting music from very diverse genres. These genres range from the classical to popular music, band music, folk songs, or hymn in a single composition. Let us hear a short passage of second movement of Three Places in New England by Ives. So Rochberg admired this kind of style, and he started to merge a collage technique and a use of past music into his own musical language. Second, the visual arts influenced Rochberg. He was especially drawn to Cubist artists, a way of synthesizing a multiple perspective on a single subject, a single object, and used the collage technique to achieve a similar effect in his music. Rochberg's new aesthetic was also embodied in his concept of multiple gesture, which accounts for the generative structure of his late period. Rochberg's approach to musical quotation was to borrow a portion of an existing melody and rhythm and then reconstruct or modify the music, often combining a material from multiple composers in a single work, and this technique called multiple gesture. Most importantly, the loss of his son profoundly altered Rochberg's approach to music. He first stopped composing because of an inability to express his grief through serial music. Rochberg recalled, "After Paul died, that absolutely made it necessary for me to wash my hands of the whole thing, which is serialism." The composer confessed, "It has taken me all this year to recognize and embrace the fact that I am a root. I am a complete romantic, and especially now the question arises on all sides. After the abstraction, what's next? The answer rings out clearly, the new romanticism." Thus, Rochberg reinvented his musical language after 1965, turning from serialism back to tonality. His representative works from this neo-romantic period include Music for the Magic Theater, Symphony No. 3, Imago Mundi, String Quartet No. 3, and Quintet for Piano and String Quartet. Here, for example, a short passage for Music for the Magic Theater. sorry to stop it. If you have time, please listen to the whole thing. It is very, very beautiful. Rochberg's solo piano works from this period are Knockback, Carnival music, and partita variation, and 4 short sonatas, and three pieces. So in this respect, Rochberg's music evidence considerable influence from the variety sources, composer like Charles Ives, as well as the visual art, and his personal life event. Carnival music is a multi-movement composition for solo piano and is representative of Rochberg's late period. Could you please check the sound? 저 죄송한데요. 사운드 좀. 지금 지지직거리는데요? Anyway, Carnival music is a multi-movement composition for solo piano and is representative of Rochberg's late period. Written in 1971, the work was dedicated to Jerome Lowenthal, who was my teacher at Juilliard. It consists of 5 contrasting movements: Fanfare March, Blues, Largo Doloroso, Sfumato, and Toccata Rag. Before I go on to the work analysis, I would like to talk about the motif that Rochberg uses throughout this work. This work is based on Bach motif, and he mentioned that the Bach Sinfonia does indeed form the foundation of Carnival music. So you can see the red box on the right side. If I remove the repeated notes of A flat, and then goes down to F sharp, the 4-note motif reveals an interesting connection to the famous BACH Bach musical letter. The Bach musical letter is, if I change the order of to, that will be the same Bach musical letter in transposed way. And another possible figuration of this motif is in the blue box, is ascending semitone. At times, Rochberg uses this chromatic ascending line to create dissonant chord. Okay, let's move on to the first movement. The first movement, Fanfares and March, consists of 3 main sections: fanfare, march, and coda. Rochberg combines this atonal fanfare and tonal march into the same movement, which exemplifies his term multiple gesture. In terms of Bach motif, it may be found in measure 6, the red box. So F. He displays the register of the pitches, but the actual sounds like and also in measure 10 features the Bach motif in the red box. The G, A, B flat, and A flat. And it sounds simultaneously. And the actual sounds like in contrast to fanfare, this march section clearly demonstrates the influence of American pop song. The left-hand ostinato figure, A flat, E flat, E flat, these fragments suggest a strong tonic and dominant relationship in the key of A flat major. And also the chromatic arrangement of the Bach motif, here, the circles, appears in the right hand simultaneously. So it sounds like before I move on to the next movement, I'd like to point out one more thing. Where the march section ends, the chord consists of G dominant in the left hand, whereas in the right hand it has with the A sharp, which is inharmonically B flat. And yes, it can be reasonably interpreted harmonically on paper. It occurs orally to the listener, simply a dissonant chord. And it connects, this role of this chord is very important because it connects the atonal fanfare section to the tonal march section. So atonal fanfare section to tonal march section. Second, the title of this movement already suggests the direct reference to the blues genre and is believed that to be a nostalgic reflection of Rochberg's own jazz experience. Blues can be divided into 7 parts, or it can be defined as a theme, 5 variation, and a coda. And I will point out how Rochberg variates the Bach theme on every variation. It is very interesting to see it. The theme consists of quasi-improvisatory without any bar lines or time signature. And the Bach motif appears in the upper voice. Here, in the upper voice, above the bass, F bass. And in the third system, here, similarly the motif appears again with B flat in the left hand's upper voice this time. The first variation, since the theme is unmeasured, the first variation technically starts on measure 2. The Bach motif appears again as an ostinato. And the second variation, whereas the previous variation was strongly melody-oriented, the second variation is more focused on the chordal texture and syncopated rhythm. This variation is not only used the Bach motif, but also modifies the rhythm. And the combination with the harmonic progression and the syncopated rhythm clearly illustrate a strong blues character. In variation 3, the Bach motif is not introduced as clearly in this variation, However, the minor second embellishing interval is used here in order to show the transformative nature of the Bach motif. By presenting the minor second interval as a grace note, Rochberg hints the double meaning. Not only is the interval as embellishment itself, but the grace notes serve as an expressive tool for the blues. The third movement, Largo Doloroso, plays a very important role in the carnival music. This movement functions as a bridge. It elevates the listener from the first and second movements, and it provides a contrast to the long, serious fourth movement sfumato. In the fourth movement, Rochberg references the Renaissance technique, painting technique called sfumato, which directly translates to vanish with smoke. This describes the technique of softening the boundaries between colors. Leonardo da Vinci was the first painter who used this technique, and his Mona Lisa exemplifies the sfumato technique. And interestingly, Rochberg quotes a Bach Sinfonia No. 9, Brahms Capriccio Opus 76 No. 8, and in this movement. Both of this work and atonal section blend well together, thereby reflecting the concept of no boundaries that constitutes the sfumato painting techniques. The collage of Bach work from the Baroque period and Brahms' work from Romantic period, and the coexistence of the tonality and the atonality, plus the relating the art technique, sfumato, demonstrates Rochberg's way of connecting diverse elements in his music. So this movement is also a best example of multiple gesture. In this piece, the pianissimo ostinato evokes a quiet, looming atmosphere. This ostinato is stacked, and the overall sound is veiled, and throughout a continuous and simultaneous use of una coda and damper pedals. Rochberg felt that the rondo form was the best suited to capturing the sfumato technique because its predictable structure allows for many opportunities to explore stylistic flexibilities. His use of eighth note ostinato figures as a constant creates common ground between contrasting stylistic areas. By moving between evocation of Bach and Brahms through the form's alternating A, B, and C sections, Rochberg successfully illustrates the visual arts effect of sfumato. The last movement, finally, is another unique piece in which Rochberg fuses the disparate genres of the toccata and rag from different eras. The toccata genres, which originated in the late 17th to 18th century and was bound to keyboard specifically. Ragtime, on the other hand, was predecessor of jazz. As a finale, Rochberg recapitulates the element from the previous movement. The opening theme of the first movement appears again, and coda also quotes the second movement. And that demonstrates the unity across the five movements. Therefore, the last movement important role by organically synthesizing all 5 movements. To summarize, Rochberg's Carnival music clearly evidences the composer's neo-romantic manner. The juxtaposition of the tonality and atonality written in a single movement serves to regulate the musical tension of the work. And he successfully illustrates the aesthetic by combining the old and new. The old forms and genres such as toccata and theme and variation versus the new, the distinct harmonic and rhythmic elements of a ragtime and blues. Most notably, the technique of quotation played an important role in this work. Frequent quotation from Bach Sinfonia and Brahms affirm his embracement of tradition into his own language. In this way, Carnival music is highly emblematic of the Rochberg's late period. So now I'm going to perform the complete Carnival music. Before I start performing, I would like to thank all of you for coming during this pandemic. And I would like to thank Dr. Green, who was my advisor. Without him, I would not be able to do this lecture. I would not be able to do thesis, of course. So thank you for your time and your effort. And also my beloved teacher, Professor Kevin, and Dr. Langford, who always advising me and guiding me in so many ways. So thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed my long lecture. And here's the Carnival music. The total length will be 27 minutes. Thank you.